to record.
There it goes.
Thank you so much.
All right, we ready to go?
We are.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for joining us. This is Lisa Dawson. I work for the Georgia Department of Public Health. We are so thrilled to have you here for our webinar with Dr. Lynn Davey. She is a communications framing subject matter expert. We have worked with her in the past and feel like we have lots more to learn. So we've invited her back and she is okay with hanging out with us for a minute. So we are really thrilled that she has come back for a second year to help us be consistent in our approaches to communication around injury prevention. So Lynn, you want to take over?
I'm happy to. Thank you.
Okay.
And I want to thank you and Jill and Stephanie for making all the behind the scenes stuff happen and conceptualizing this. Since we're doing this in a webinar format, I can't see any of you participants, but I was hoping this could be kind of interactive. So I'd really encourage you to raise your hand and then we can figure out how to unmute you, et cetera. And I'll stop at a couple different times along the way to give everybody a chance to give commentary or questions. So I'm going to focus on today sort of what framing can do for you in your communication efforts, with examples mostly from transportation and traffic safety in this round of work that we're doing together. The next week, on the 9th and the 10th, the 9th is going to be just a 1-hour session on, okay, how do you take all this framing business and make an infographic that's effective? The 10th is going to be, what about social media posts? How do we effectively frame social media posts? And then there is the opportunity to have one-on-one sessions with me if you want to, go over something that you're creating or thinking about, if you have a press release or an infographic or a fact sheet or a white paper or any of those things. So let's just kind of get to it and see where we go. So why are we here today? Because the way we talk about social problems affects how people understand their causes and their solutions. That's why we're here today. And what do I know? Why are you generously offering some time to spend with me today? And that is that social issue communications aren't usually informed by relevant science. And I'm going to talk a little bit here at the beginning about why that is. But I think, a lot of it is because we inherit things from product marketing. It's because we don't have big enough budgets to have communication staff, or communication staff come out of other traditions. They don't come out of social science or communication science. So we're going to, by the end of next Thursday morning, I guess it would be, you're going to feel like you know so much more than anyone else about framing. So this is our crash course. So what we're going to do together is we're going to talk today about how features of human thinking, how our cognition can help or hinder communication efforts on transportation safety. And I'm using transportation safety that might not be the best term, but any injury related to transportation issues. And then what are the key elements of more effective frames and more effective framing? How can we do this better? How can we make sure we're not, just treading the same paths of stereotypes people have about injury, et cetera? So the bottom line, if you have to go take another call in 10 minutes and you can't stay with us, the bottom line is that we often hold communications accountable to resonating or raising awareness, and that can be at the cost of improving understanding of causes and solutions. So I sometimes think of this as, we do heartstrings instead of brains. And when we engage people's brains, we often are shallow in the explanation. And, I think the goal of social issue communications should be to make people smarter about the causes and solutions to issues. Secondly, we often draw attention primarily to individual behavior change. And I'm going to tell you why that sort of reinforces how we already think about individual responsibility. Doing that can obscure the role of contexts, of systems, of policy, right? So if you think about just the way a lot of traffic accidents are portrayed on the news, it's where did it happen, what happened, who was affected. Law enforcement is usually the spokesperson. They might talk to victims or et cetera. And so we get sort of caught up in thinking, what did those people do wrong, right? Not, oh, was this the fifth accident in this particular intersection in the last several months? So we'll fix that. And we also fail to effectively translate the data that we understand and our own expertise. So we use a lot of jargon. I know that whenever I start new work with clients, there are lots of acronyms and abbreviations that I have to learn, and I see them in their communications materials and other things like that. So let's just look at a couple examples. What do social issue communications tend to do, and what are the implications of that? Okay. Here's just a campaign poster that I saw when I was doing some research. Stop distracted driving. We've probably all seen this, right? These are really difficult issues because we are the ones with the phones, right? That are picking up the phone. But this again is sort of the focus on, oh, the individual has to stop distracted driving, right? Here's another typical kind of campaign. It's about emotional resonance, right? There's this, like you see this person in handcuffs, drink, drive, go to jail, not worth it, soberrides.org. There seems to be something there that might give us some more information about the issue, but it doesn't say it on this. And then of course, a campaign we're all familiar with, the designated driver campaign. So again, the designated driver campaign and all of the sort of programmatic things that came, designated driver programs that came after that, we've probably all been through them. They were in schools, et cetera, but they've never been proven to have an effect on reducing drunk driving, right? There've been lots of meta-analyses of designated driver campaigns and programs. They haven't been shown to have a long-term effect on reducing drunk driving. What has? Ignition interlocks, roadside sobriety checkpoints. You probably know all this, right? So it's not that we can't do both things, like have, get people sort of conscious of designating a driver, especially when this started. I think it was in the early 80s. But when we focus the issue so much on what individual people can do, it's harder for people to understand why we would want to fund more roadside sobriety checkpoints, for example. So that's sort of the key lesson. And why do we do this? A lot of our strategies come from product marketing. Product marketing is targeting your personal behavior. You have a cat, I want you to buy that cat food. It targets what a colleague of mine called a point of purchase decision, right? I want you to choose that cat food off the shelf in this moment. And we just sort of inherit these kinds of strategies. Social issues, however, are, yes, they have individual solutions, but there's local, there's state, there's regional, there's national, right? So my question is always, why then are we using product marketing techniques in our communications when both the causes and the solutions are very different, right? Typical goal, we want to raise awareness of the issue. If we just raised awareness, right, people would have a clue and they would care. And I actually don't think people don't care. I think we often don't tell them how they could play a role in the solution because we are just trying to get their attention, right, and resonate. I was a research director at a child advocacy organization many years ago. And whenever we had the Kids Count project, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, whenever we would release a report or a data book, we'd all gather around the conference table and say, okay, what's our message going to be? What do we think is going to get the most news? And we put that all together and we'd send it to the designer, or, we'd do it in Canva ourselves or whatever. And the measures of our success, quantity measures. How much news did we make? Did we get in the first 5 minutes of broadcast news? Were we A1 top of the fold in the newspapers? And of course, nowadays, it's how many website hits did we get? How many people mentioned it or shared it? How many likes did we get on all our different social media accounts? How many people downloaded the report? Those are typical measures. I'm not saying you shouldn't continue to track them, but we might want to look at some other measures as well. Okay. A better goal than raising awareness is to have an understanding of how people think and process information and how the way we frame interacts with their understanding. And the good news is that can be known. There's lots of research. I'm going to share a lot of it with you today and next week about how certain strategies that you choose and certain order, even the order of how you say things and who says it and the tone you say it in, the data that you use to support it, all of these things are kind of what a frame is, right? So we need to have that kind of understanding of how our messages are going to be received. So using that kind of information, looking at the research on what people think and know, even just public opinion research on the topic, doing that and then sending it to the designer or using online tools and PowerPoint and that sort of thing in your in-house shop. But I think this is a better strategy, and this is really where our work together is going to be centered. So let me see if there's okay, Lisa is just saying, encouraging questions, want the input, so don't feel shy about sending something to the Q&A. So in addition to the strategy, then add in quality measures to what you're tracking. Are you telling causal stories? A little more on that later. Or are you just relying on anecdotes? Causal stories are those things that connect the dots between, oh, what's the cause? What are the consequences of that? And how does our solution fit with those causes and consequences? Are you interpreting data clearly? Is your communication free of jargon? You should have a jargon editor. I sometimes use my 12-year-old nephew as my jargon editor. He reviewed my website when I first had a consulting practice. And he said, Aunt Lynn, I really have no idea what you do. So I kept revising it until he, as a 12-year-old, could understand. So, okay, let's get into it. Let's talk and think about thinking. This is going to be familiar to you, but we might not consider it when we're drafting our communications. So our thinking is guided by mental models, right? We are big conceptual thinkers. We don't just, study every word on a page and have something bubble up to us. It's the other way around, right? We have assumptions, we have beliefs based on our past experiences, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to remember people aren't blank slates. They come with these sort of conceptual models, right? And we rely on these mental models to be efficient. So they help us organize information, organize people, organize situations we encounter. If you think about scripts that we have in our head about how stuff works, right? So you walk into a restaurant and you expect to see some sort of sign that says, please be seated or wait to be seated. And then once that happens, you're looking around for somebody to bring you a menu, right? Or a QR code, as we've been doing recently. So we have all of these sort of unconscious scripts. And if those get violated, we're like, hey, what's going on here? This isn't really fitting. So we move about our social worlds relying on these kind of mental models. So this is where I was going to use the chat. I don't, do you all have access to the chat? I can't tell. or if just panelists have access to the chat. I guess it's just us panelists. So you can just sit there and write a note on your desk or say it to yourself in your head. I want you to just tell me what comes to mind when I show you these images, okay? I'll give you a second. Of course, planes, trains, automobiles, right? But many of you are probably thinking transportation. Some might think travel. What if I add these to it? What do these things say to you now? Oh, and Elizabeth is being smart. She's using the Q&A as the chat. You can do that too. I'm opening up the Q&A to as a chat box, since you all can do that.
And if people want to raise their hands, I can unmute them for a minute.
Great.
To answer.
So yes, people are thinking about vacation now, right? I've added these few other elements in. And so that's all really to just say, you didn't have to go through like your big filing cabinet of possible things. Like you thought, oh, what makes sense? How do I make sense of this stuff really, really quickly, right? So we kind of are fast and frugal cognators, as some social cognition folks like to say. Also, ambiguity does not prevent perception. Just because things aren't clear doesn't mean we're not going to try to make sense of them, right? We fill in the blanks, we try to make sense of stuff. Like, what is this? Can you see anything in this pixelated image? You can use the Q&A box, you can raise your hand. Does anyone see anything? I think we've got a hand raised, but I can't get to it, so.
Sidani, I think you can speak now if you want to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, my brain was really trying to wrap my head around this, and the first thing I thought was like the state of Louisiana. I don't know why.
Yeah, because there's like mappy stuff in there, right? We're used to seeing land masses and ocean as dark or land masses as white, okay? Alex sees a face. Anyone else? Okay, so I'm going to tell you what it is. It is a cow. So try to see the cow. So I'm going to help you. You can see my cursor when I move it, right?
Yes.
So yeah, okay, great. So this is the cow's left ear and eye. This is the cow's right ear and eye. This is the big white forehead, snout, and then the nose and mouth. And the cow is like standing behind a fence. That's what all of this up in this these vertical lines are. And so the cow is sort of up against the fence here, looking at you like this. Can you see it now? Some people might.
Said what?
Can you see it, Stephanie?
No, I cannot.
Okay.
I can see I can see the outline of the cow.
It's, yeah, I mean, it's a very pixelated cow, right?
Yep.
But this is the cow's one eye, the right, well, she's looking at you, right eye, left eye, ear in black, the big head and the snout coming down, and then the nose here and the mouth, right? Nostrils here.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's hard, right?
Got it. Yeah,
Because
no.
it's- yeah, and Ursula is saying, what? Like, that's not a cow. So, so it can be hard if you've already decided, wait, this is the state of Louisiana. I know this is a map, or this is a weird X-ray of something. It can be really hard to get yourself off of that, right? But also, once you see the cow having not seen the cow before, try to not see the cow. You'll probably start squinting your eyes or something to try to, mess up the image, right? So, and if you can't see the cow, don't worry about it. You don't fail class today. But the idea is that once a frame is sort of established, I know it's a perceptual trick, but once you've sort of got the frame, it's really hard to get off of it and to see something else. So what if I present facts? Okay, I want you to use the Q&A again to put your answers down. Not everybody is participating, and I'm going to make note of who that is. All right, I'm going to tell you the animal is a large, powerful but gentle, black-haired quadruped. What am I talking about? Alex says a bear. Anyone else have ideas? Bear, big dog, horse, gorilla, a bear, a cow. I would think a horse. Okay. I was trying to get you to think of a Great Dane. This was my dearly beloved Lorenzo, who children would come to our gate and point to him and say, horsey, 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 because he is 180 pounds. He's probably 7 feet tall, on his hind legs, right? And so he didn't fit their mental model of dog if they had labs or pugs or Frenchies or whatever, right? Until they interacted with him and, oh, he's on a leash. Oh, he's got a squeaky toy. Oh, he knows how to woof, right? So that he has these doggy characteristics that they can identify. But I point that out for a couple things, right? Like if what you're presenting doesn't fit people's most highly available and accessible schema or mental model, it can be hard to, to sort of navigate that. Also, if we just present facts or data, you all mapped on what you thought that could be, right? It could have just as easily been a horse, a bear. I don't know. I'm going to make sense of the data in the way that I know how, or what's most accessible to me. So for that reason, data really have to be framed. And next week, a week from today, when we talk about how to do fact sheets and infographics, that's what we're really gonna be looking at. So let's move on from Lorenzo. Okay, what does that have to do with how people think about issues? Once a mental model is engaged, it's hard to reframe, right? You can't not see the cow once you saw the cow. We rely mostly on easily accessible and apparently applicable models, right? So when I added in the sunscreen and the camera, that made it more applicable to vacation than just transportation. And we need to frame our facts because we don't want people to see a horse when we're talking about a dog, right? Okay. So what do you think are the most accessible mental models that people have about injury prevention? This is where I was hoping we'd have a little bit of a convo. So,
Lynn, you have a question as well.
Okay. Is there a set of approaches to use if we're trying to change people's minds? Yes. Well, Alex, we're going to talk about framing strategies. I don't know about changing people's minds. It really depends on what the thing is, like how invested they are. If it's something they don't understand well, it's easier to make them smarter about that issue. If people, some people are just not going to change their mind because it's about what we call identity protective cognition. Like, I need to think this because, I sort of unconsciously need to believe this because it's about who I am and how I think of myself. But I am for the rest of the webinar today going to talk about how to frame effectively. So do you think there are ways that people just think when it comes to injury prevention? What are they? We've got a couple raised hands. I don't know if you can see them.
I would guess people would think what they seen all their life, like the stop sign, be careful, don't fall, don't slip. Just a collective of those images and those sayings that they've seen since childhood.
I think you're right. Was that Sidani speaking?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is
Others?
I was
Okay, Ursula.
just as you said, you can't unsee what you've seen with the cow. Since you already talked about seeing it really as a personal responsibility issue.
Right.
That I think that's what we think. Like if you get injured, it's pretty much your fault.
Right.
Be more careful.
Yeah, and Andrea is saying being careful, taking precautions. Danielle wearing protective gear, someone else injuries. That's why we call it an accident, right? It's just bad luck. And Tobin, I'm not sure what Swiss cheese means, but you can feel free to build that thought out. And yeah, people think wrong place, wrong time, bad luck, right? So that's kind of, that's the landscape that you have to navigate through. and to get people to see systems and structures and planning and, collective things that we can do, it can be pretty difficult. Another thing, we also rely on mental models, not just to organize information and put things in categories, but to help us make judgments and decisions about things, right? So these are called heuristics, if you care about that, sort of rules of thumb. Problem is, a lot of these are biases. So what I did was I reviewed the literature on which of the biases seem to crop up more often in transportation safety issues. And these are, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but over on my wall over there, I have this huge poster of this. These are all the cognitive biases. So we have biases that are based on needing to act fast, on trying to decide what is most salient to remember. We have biases when there's too much information coming at us, right? Or there are different biases that deal with the fact that we might not have enough information or not enough meaning. A lot of us have heard of the confirmation bias, right? So the confirmation bias is that we overvalue the facts that confirm our beliefs. And it's really fascinating, right? We will actively seek out information that confirms our belief. It's like, if you think of it in partisan ways, it's why you can see real partisan splits in the different news outlets that are consumed, right? Fox News versus MSNBC versus like what's in the middle, right? So confirmation bias is something that I think a lot of us are familiar with, which is why I mention it, but there are others that are sort of more relevant. The biggest is attribution bias. Personal attributions are the default or automatic inference people make for the causes of others' behavior. Period. In life, in general, this is true, right? So I'm a bit of a klutz and I'm always kind of tripping and doing stupid stuff. And and whenever I do, my husband will say, "Oh my God, you're such a klutz, didn't you? You tripped." Even if there was like a loose brick in the sidewalk, it's always going to be my fault, right? So just knowing that if we're trying to understand someone's behavior, we're likely to look to them to try to figure it out. And so this is just kind of the default way that our brains are operating. That's why campaigns that focus first or primarily or exclusively or mostly on personal behavior change, that's why it's really hard for people to then see public policy or collective action as something that might help. Think about road rage, right? Attribution bias is really evident in road rage because people are just blaming the other driver for doing something that, engenders their ire. So that would be an example that's easy to think about. There's also something called the illusion of control bias. I like infographics and cartoons to explain things. Oh, sorry, I made it rain. I stepped on an ant. Like, how could you? So their illusion of control has been linked to aggressive driving. So it's this idea that people are actually more in control of their environments than they actually are. And so illusion of control and other biases are sometimes linked to those kinds of things. Optimism bias, that is another that it might be relevant, that's where we overestimate our chances of success and of things going well. I actually don't know people who have this who's an optimist these days, but this bias is this notion that, oh, everything's going to be okay, right? And it's not linked to risky behavior, but it is linked to people's self-report of traffic violations and that sort of thing. So it might not, it's not like illusion of control that's correlated with risky behavior, but it is correlated with some traffic safety violations and that sort of things. One more thing, it's not just, our personal mental models, our biases that we're most defensive about or are going to get enacted. We also have culture to think about. Culture affects our reasoning. We have shared cultural mental models or cultural schema, as some anthropologists like to call them. So think about, like, what are some of the stories that people rely on to reason about transportation safety? I'm gonna give you a hint. I mean, we've talked about personal responsibility already, right? But I think I've done research all over this country across all kinds of issues, and there are sort of these core American stories that come up over and over again that people use to try to make sense of stuff. And I think there are two that are really relevant to transportation safety. One is American individualism, that personal responsibility is all you need to succeed. It's bootstraps, it's all that. But it's why people think, oh, well, you should have just worn more protective gear, or you shouldn't have been walking late at night without reflective gear or whatever, right? The other one that can really present a challenge is government's a problem, not the solution. We've all heard this storyline before, right? And a lot of people believe, government should stay out of it. Government should be smaller. Government is going to infringe on my personal rights and freedoms. So we have to somehow, go get beyond these kinds of tensions. So think about how those stories, those models influence how people think about prevention of injury, right? Distracted driving, cell phone use, seatbelt use, speeding, who's responsible, right? So, and when you look at the way a lot of these kind of campaigns nationally or in different states, they do try to get people to stop doing the thing, right? So you add all this, okay, we're already personal attributions of responsibility, then we're already kind of communicating in ways that reinforce that. We're blurring the contexts, right? We're blurring the public healthness of these issues, and we have to do a better job of showing people how these are public health issues. So what do we know? Mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, biases characterize our thinking. And cultural narratives like American individualism are really accessible to people, especially if they're repeated in public discourse. So can we do anything about it? Can we communicate about transportation in ways that decrease the role that these biases and schema and mental shortcuts play in driver behavior, in attributions of responsibility? What do you think? I mean, have I just been the harbinger of bad news here? Am I just making you depressed about, about the chances for effective communication, or what is this making you think about? I'm going to stop to see if we can talk for a bit. Ursula raised her hand.
I think particularly because the topics that I would like to communicate about, there's a lot of blame on the individual. And so, yeah, on the one hand, yes, you're you've brought the gloom. On the other hand, for the people who are affected by these things, to have it framed in a different way, like actually, you know, you might have had a role, but this whole thing isn't your fault. It's kind of like medical errors. There's a larger system at play here. There's more to consider than, you know, a decision you did or didn't make.
And what are Ursula, what are the issues that you're referring to?
Death by suicide and drug
Oh.
overdose.
Okay.
And for women veterans with sexual trauma, their lack of engagement in VA PTSD treatment, which is framed as the avoidant behavior on their part because of their PTSD, when really it's institutional.
Yeah. Thank you. And you can, I want to just say, even though we're focusing on transportation here as just the examples, you know, if you want to sign up for one of the individual sessions, we can talk about those issues. I have some resources that might be helpful to you.
Great.
Sidani, I see your hand raised also.
Yes, so this conversation reminds me of a book I read called Hooked. And from just what I read and even like the presentation I seen yesterday, I would say you want to decrease the pain. You want to take them away from those blaring messages that it's your fault or this is what's going to happen to you. And you want to increase the pleasurable outcome. You want to take away the shame, especially when you're dealing with suicide, like myself with suicide prevention. Even, and like, you know, there's also risk for family members or friends that are involved with someone who had made an attempt or someone that was, you know, committed suicide themselves. So you want to make sure to take away that shame, take away or decrease the cultural views that are kind of harboring, you know, the result that you don't want. So it's almost like a child. Like if you have a child and you're like, don't touch that, the first thing they're going to do is touch that.
Why shouldn't I touch that? Let me find
Exactly.
out.
They're interested in it now. So just kind of like reframing it in a way that it decreases the pain and it also takes away the shame, and it yields a more positive outcome for everyone involved. So that's just my nutshell, because it's kind of like reminding me of that book I read, and I remember putting that together in my head when I read that.
I don't know the book, I've just written it down. But just to, I think, you know, everything you and Ursula said is really spot on. And, you know, one of the things that I think, another thing we often tend to do, especially with mental health issues and drug use, is we assume stigma is a driving force of, you know, some people not getting help. And yes, that it is, but then we decide we're going to do an anti-stigma campaign, right? And and they're very, very difficult to get any long-term effects from. So it can be more beneficial to just get, you know, actually have community mental health, you know, infrastructure in this country, right? So just to always, I think another thing we do is that we assume the social analysis, like, oh, stigma is operating here, should lead to or be perfectly correlated with the communication strategy. And it can't be. So there are really interesting research that a friend of mine is doing on stigma campaigns showing that they can actually reinforce stigma as opposed to, you know, diminishing it if it's, so I always tell people, when you're trying to decide what you should do to communicate to solve this problem, don't think there's a one-to-one relationship, and look at what the research is on the kinds of campaigns that you're interested in, right? So thank you for that. I think what you were saying, Sidani, is getting at what Alex is writing in the chat, or wrote in the chat. Could we emphasize collective responsibility? We take care of each other. Yes, that's exactly it. That's what we want to do, is show collective responsibility. And getting context into the picture, which I think both Ursula and Sidani were talking about. It's like, well, what's going on here? It's not that these women aren't using the service, right? There's a bigger context that's having that's a causal driver here that we're not discussing. So let me give you some key lessons from framing science that can help here. I will say, I think we could probably make more headway in changing attributions of responsibility for social problems than we can in changing individual people's behavior. So if we follow like some of the ideas that you've shared here in the chat and in your comments, in getting a little bit of collective thinking and getting context in public structures and public health, we can get people to think about these issues differently. If we try to pick off every single person who's going to, look at their phone when they're at an intersection, we're going to be here for the rest of our lives. So let's see what we can do to frame these issues in ways that help people who aren't experts like yourselves understand a little bit better. So what's a frame? We keep talking about framing. Frames are interpretive storylines that set a specific train of thought in motion, communicate why an issue might be a problem, who or what might be responsible for it, and what should be done about it. I really love this definition. So if you think about it, we're setting an interpretive storyline. That means there is nothing that you say or write or tweet or do in social media or post that doesn't have an interpretive storyline. So the idea is really to control it as best you can. What's in the frame? Okay, it's not just the words, it's who's saying it, it's the tone, it's the visuals you attach to it. A lot of times, I think in a lot of mental health and substance use campaigns, we often see these sort of dark, foreboding images, right, of people with substance use disorder, for example, instead of showing the solution image or showing somebody getting, community mental health services or that sort of thing. And we often throw just lots of data out there instead of making sure the data that we're choosing are supporting our overall frame. So if you think about your issue, even if you're not working in transportation issues, think about who's in the frame and what's in the frame of your issue. And if you just even sketch that out for yourself, it can give you a lot of information. So I'll give you an example. I was doing work on children's oral health, and most people don't think of that as a crisis situation, but the advocates were really talking about it like it was a crisis. And I was like, I think, there's lots of other things. There's, racial inequity and poverty and et cetera, that are going to be higher on people's list. So let's kind of reframe this. But in the frame already, it's just teeth and toothpaste and like little dancing, canine teeth and, toothbrushes and toothpaste and smiles, et cetera. But nowhere in the frame was health. So what we did was we worked to get oral health connected to overall health so that people could see it really as a health issue. We also found out that the worst messengers were dentists because people didn't want to hear from dentists about oral health because they thought, oh, they just want more work. They want more patients, right? But pediatricians were great messengers for dental health because they could talk about the connection to overall health and kids' well-being. So if you sort of just even map out like, what's in the frame and who's in it, I think that can be really helpful. And, you know, when it comes to transportation safety, in the frame are sort of episodes and events, right? Like accidents and what happened. And I was reading a media analysis, and lots of reports of traffic accidents focus on how disruptive the accident was to to people getting around. You know, oh, this caused a 2-hour delay, blah blah blah. Law enforcement are the ones in the frame, right? But they're not transportation and planning engineers and public health researchers. You know, they're not part of the conversation for the most part. So again, you know, these are very typical, right? Very typical campaigns that we see. And I shared one of these before, but it's trying to get you to notice, but it's not really giving any better information. So we're going to talk about things like this because these get posted a lot to social media. People are trying to do graphics that contain, you know, that get people to notice. We're going to talk about these kinds of things in the social media session. But here's another piece before we move on that I think can be helpful for you to consider. I don't know if anybody's read this book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he didn't come up with this idea that we have sort of two systems of thinking, but it really, I think it really helps to think about it this way. We have system one, that's our fast thinking, right? It's unconscious, it's intuitive, it's associative. So if I say, what's 2 + 2? If I say, finish the sentence, war end, you know, you're not going to have any trouble coming up with 4 or coming up with peace, right? System 2 is slow. So that's the conscious, effortful, deliberative. And I think that, you know, a lot of these campaign posters and stuff we've been looking at, people are trying to get at your fast thinking, right? I just want you to associate something. I want to get your attention. But they make the mistake of thinking that that's going to transition correctly to the kind of slow, effortful thinking we want people to have. Another way this is relevant is that experts, I think, often go right to system 2. Like they start talking in ways that require conscious deliberation, or they have long, you know, explanations of a problem. And so, but it's like fact-based presentations, right? It's like, I gave you all those facts. I wanted you to think about Lorenzo, but some of you were thinking about a bear. So your fast, unconscious, intuitive self was kind of directing the conversation. So we can't assume that, you know, that system 2 is going to come along and correct for whatever fast mistake system 1 made. So that gets at, I don't know if it was Alex's question or somebody else's question about how do we change people's minds? Well, you sort of want your system 1 and 2 to be aligned, right? You want to appeal to people's values, those quick thinking, oh, this is about interdependence, and then you want to tell a better explanation that aligns with their system 2 slow thinking. So I just throw that out there because I think this can be another helpful way to think about what are we doing when we're framing. So how do we make more effective appeals on our issue? It's both content, and it's the structure of that content, and it's strategies. So framing isn't the panacea. It's another helpful tool in your toolbox. So here's what you should do. Oh, and by the way, I have a PDF of all of the important slides that we'll email you after this. So you don't have to be taking notes on this part of what to do. So the first thing you want to do is you want to appeal to collective values. So things like equal opportunity for all, or interdependence, the notion that we're connected, concern or care for other people. Another sort of set of values are like invention and innovation. Like Americans like to think of ourselves, right, as being an ingenious, like, we can solve this, we can work together to solve this problem. So that's a place you should start. That's like getting at the system one fast. Second, describe themes, not just events or episodes, and not just anecdotes of individual people. So you want to provide as much context as possible. We're not going to talk about it a ton here, but I do, since some of you are dealing with other issues, particularly that are for which there are real stereotypes in the general public, right, about who has substance use disorder, who has mental health issues, who has PTSD, right? You know, all of these things. Be very careful and do not assume that if you tell one anecdote about an individual person's story, that is going to get people to see the public or collective dimensions. You should tell many stories of how different people are affected. But I think sometimes we decide, oh, we're going to choose one example and hope that tells the story. It can really backfire because people get so caught up in that person's story that they just see the person. They don't see the issue anymore. Okay, so just be careful about that. Describe themes, not just episodes. Always point to solutions. We often leave solutions out of our communications. And be positive and constructive. And I think, you know, Sidani, this is sort of what you were getting at, and I think in some of your comments, not fear-based, right? There's research with adolescents and transportation safety, and they don't, you know, fear doesn't motivate them because they're not as risk averse as the rest of us, right? So fear-based campaigns for traffic safety and transportation safety don't work as well with adolescents. Also, use humor whenever possible. That really gets people's attention. So values, themes, solutions, positive. I thought this was really good. I saw this when I did some work last year, so I thought I'd show it again. The MAD website, destination elimination. So they have this whole metaphor of roadmap, totally appropriate, right? So a roadmap to end drunk driving. We know where we're going. We know how to get there. We've plotted a course that ends drunk driving, fights drunk driving, and educates the next generation. The only question is, are you coming with us? Right? So this is very appealing, I think, in a lot of ways. Metaphors are your friends. Like, if you can use metaphors and analogies, you know, it draws people in. It also plays really well to visual information.
Lynn, you have a message in the
Oh.
Q&A.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Alex is saying all that scared straight programming focused on teens, right? Yeah, it's like the DARE stuff, right? That has never been shown to be actually effective. So thanks for that comment. Yeah, so anyway, this is more of the MAD campaign. It's visually really easy to look at, and it's showing that prevention is high visibility law enforcement. It is ignition interlock, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a nice model. So once we get the content down, and I'm going to be showing you next week in particular how to drive these sort of strategies into particular kinds of communication. What you should do is you should really develop a messaging framework that is shared by everybody who's communicating. So if you have statewide coalitions, if it's just getting memoranda of understanding amongst all of your typical allies, I mean, when I see things change, people's understanding of issues change, it's because everybody who's talking about it is saying the same thing. So building towards the same framework, messaging framework, and it doesn't mean that everybody's working on the same solution. You can share kind of a meta narrative that gets driven to different particular issues. I could see that happening with, you know, people who are just focused on distracted driving, people who are just focused on seatbelt use. I do a lot of work in early childhood, children's mental health, child abuse and neglect prevention. And, there's kind of a meta narrative that can be shared across all child advocates, but that gets sort of nuanced towards the particular issue and solutions that are being put forward. So sharing your communications, sharing your message, key. Second, reach out to journalists and news directors if this is a space you can operate in. I know that academic institutions can't always do that, but you want to expand media coverage of these issues to include public health professionals and researchers, right? So you can always reach out to news directors and say, hey, here are our faculty, or here's our executive director, here are advocates that we want, in your Rolodex or whatever virtual Rolodexes are nowadays, to be called when things happen. And also identify and plan for communication opportunities. So they're just not all reactive, but you should also be prepared to respond. So I worked with a coalition here. I didn't mention I'm in Portland, Maine, and there was a group working on children who'd been exposed to violence. So we came up with like what they were going to say if there was an incident that they were called about. But we also had a complete communication strategy that kept getting the message out there at different times. So just as an example, like when you're shifting from Eastern Standard Time to Daylight Savings Time and back, those things can present opportunities when we're thinking about safety. First days of school, last days of school, including holiday breaks, Halloween, obviously kids are going to be walking around neighborhoods, et cetera, prom season, people driving around. And then, looking at things like Groundhog's Day or April Fool's Day as opportunities to get, how could I sort of do something kind of humorous that'll get people's attention and use that as an opportunity. So I often develop editorial calendars for my clients that will say, here are all the opportunities in January that, you could take advantage of. So to really answer your question, how do you do this? This is the recipe for an effective frame. And again, you're going to get this in a PDF, but you can screenshot this if you want. So the recipe is to answer, why does this matter? Because if I'm picking up the newspaper or I'm, Googling my local newspaper online, I'm scanning all of the stories for like, which one do I care about? Why do I care about this, right? So why does this matter is the key hook. And then you want to tell a causal story that connects the dots between the problem, the solution, and who's solving it. So what I find over and over again is that experts tend to start at what's the problem. I'm just going to lay it out. This is like all the stuff that's going on. And, I think we all have sort of crisis fatigue now, right? Like it's really, things are really difficult in our lives right now. And people want solution stories. We might have a challenge in front of us, but if we work together, we can solve it. And this is who can be involved. So I said when I started that I think we often don't show people what their role could be. That is key to communications. And I think now we have a lot of problems to address, right? But showing what can be done about it when we work together is something that people really want to hear. So I'm going to show you, this is going to be a ton of text. I'm just warning you, you don't have to read it all. But this was, I just want to show you a before and after example of framing intervention, what framing intervention can do. So this was a client of mine that worked on, let's just say, trying to stop marketing to children in schools and other spaces and that sort of thing. So when I asked them to give me well, how are you talking about it now? They sent me this paragraph, which I think was part of an op-ed. So here it is. I'm just going to read it. The rise of ubiquitous, sophisticated, and portable screen technologies allows marketers unprecedented direct access to children. At the same time, key policies and agencies created to protect kids from harmful marketing have been weakened. The result is a commercialized culture causing harm to children. Childhood obesity, eating disorders, youth violence, sexualization, family stress, underage alcohol, tobacco use, rampant materialism, and the erosion of creative play are all exacerbated by advertising and marketing. And when children adopt the values that dominate commercial culture, materialism, self-indulgence, conformity, impulse buying, and unthinking brand loyalty, the health of democracy and sustainability of our planet are threatened. Like, oh my God, right? This is just devastating to read. And when I read it, it's like, okay, marketing is the cause of all of society's ills. And well, we're never stopping it. Like, who's like, we live in a capitalist society. Like, what are we going to do about it, right? This doesn't give you any sense that you could play a role, right, in helping this. So we did a lot of work, and this is just an example of what their kind of overall draft frame that they were going to build out, of course, would look like. As adults, we have a responsibility to ensure that all children have equal opportunity for healthy development. But today, corporate marketers have increasing access to children via expanding forms of media, while key policies and agencies created to protect kids from marketing have been weakened. Marketing orients children toward consumerism and materialism and off their natural path towards social engagement, physical activity, and creative exploration. We work to make sure children's paths are directed by what's best for kids, not corporate profits. Okay, so this is the value statement. We have a responsibility to ensure all kids have equal opportunity for healthy development. And here's that causal story. Corporate marketers have more access. Agencies to protect kids are weakened. Marketing takes kids off their natural path. What are we doing? We're working to make sure kids' paths are directed by what's best for them, not by corporate profits. Okay, so that was the change that they made to their sort of overall appeal. Does this resonate? Does this make sense? Can you see how this is a different frame from the one before it, from this one? Comments or questions?
Ursula did say absolutely, this is so helpful. And
Good.
I will say, the before and after, there is a solid difference between the flow of the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, it also, like, the other thing, it was overwhelming, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
responsible for everything. Well, okay, we're never gonna get I mean, they've had some huge congressional wins in Congress, this organization, along with their allies. But I said to them, how can we get children's healthy development into the picture and talk about marketing as a problem, but let's be real, like, we're never gonna get away from from this. We're never gonna get away from screens and blah, blah, blah. So how can we just sound a little bit more reasonable and still that there's a chance for collective impact? Sidani?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really like the second one better as well. Also, when you mention assigning a role, so it says as adults we have a responsibility. So that already off the bat lets you know that if as an adult I'm reading it like, oh, that's me. Oh, this is my role. I have a responsibility, and that engaged me and that hooks me to make me want to read the rest of it.
Right. Thank you. Is this making sense to people? I mean, I know that today is really just kind of a crash course, and I'm giving you a lot of information to think about. And sometimes it can be hard to have to wait a week till we get to the real applied pieces of it.
Go ahead, Ursula.
Yeah, so it's, for me, this is really helpful, because it's actually, it's making me think more carefully about what message I actually want to convey, not just how to do it. Because I have my topic and I have my work, but I actually haven't really given much thought to this side of it at the moment. For a broad audience, for example. And of course, the audience would matter if I'm, messaging the VA about what they need to do versus, just more of a public health message about how to support those in your life who are going through these things, for example. So it's really helpful for thinking, oh, what is the value? Oh, what is our responsibility? Oh, so thank you. It's really helpful.
Great. And to that point of audience targeting, you absolutely have to do that work, right? I think what that's going to be different in different communities. So I know before this, or a couple of weeks ago, somebody had sent in a question about seatbelt use, and so I'd love to talk about that a little bit as well. But depending on who you're trying to get to and what you're trying to ask of them, your messages are going to be different. At the same time, some of these sort of big core narratives and these biases and these ways of thinking, like everybody has them, right? So I've seen a lot of success with people who do develop a sort of overall frame, like this one that I'm showing you on the screen here now. And then it gets tweaked for particular asks, for particular audiences, for particular advocacy efforts and that sort of thing. There are a couple other hands.
Yeah. Anastasia? If you're able to come off mute.
Okay, maybe we'll give her a moment. Does anybody else have a hand?
And are the folks on the call who did have that question about what we can do about improving seatbelt usage? I'm not sure who that was.
I'm not sure either. We can look into that though. All right, is there anybody else that wanted to raise their hand and ask any type of questions?
While you're thinking about that, I'll just point out what's up here on the screen. So next week, we're going to look at fact sheets and infographics. So what I'll be doing for that one is kind of like, okay, here's the content that, here's the sort of what we should be doing. What does that look like? We're going to play with a sort of template for an infographic. How much text, what data, how it should be used. We're going to talk about the difference between, design decisions and communication decision. So I work with a designer all the time, but I have to tell her, no, we're not doing it that way. It might look pretty, but it's not communicating well. So that's going to be sort of not just how do you put one together, but how do you communicate effectively in that format? And then similarly for social media. So what would make those sessions better for you is if I had a good idea of who was going to be on the call, and if you had any particular questions that you know, or particular communication issues or things that you're struggling with, or examples wanting to know if they're good or bad, people should feel free to email me or do so through Stephanie or Jill, right?
Yes, definitely.
And then did you want to talk about how to sign up for individual coaching, or is that taken care of?
Yeah, so we're asking that for people who want to sign up for the individual coaching sessions, that you are, if you could put forward between 9 and 11 some of your ideal times, but then have specific examples that you are able to send to us in advance so that we can get those to Lynn. We would like those to be kind of one-on-one sessions where you're able to talk and discuss kind of like what you are developing or working through, and having something in hand for her to be able to react to in advance. And then we'll send you a Zoom link to get into those sessions.
Yeah, in the past, you know, somebody might have been working on an infographic or just had a poster, and other people just kind of had questions or said, I'm sort of trying to sort through this and just wanted to talk. That's fine too. I'd love to have things, as Jill said, you know, in advance to look at, so I'm not just framing on the fly for you during those sessions. And also, we're looking into this but you might get updated links for next week. So just so that we can do this in a meeting, not a webinar format. So just be aware that might be coming, and staying on top of that.
Yes, definitely.
Well,
That
I
way-
want to thank everybody for their time today. I know we've been on Zoom for almost 3 years now, or no, over 3 years now, right? So this can be really a difficult way to spend your day. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll make sure we get those resources to you all.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Lynn.
absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Oops, Stephanie.
No, you're good.
We appreciate your time today, and look forward to, yeah, excellent. Look forward to seeing you hopefully next week for the additional sessions.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. You can stop recording, Jill.
Yes,